Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Dolan, Dean of the College of Health. I'm going to reintroduce myself in a second. We're just watching everyone join. So I'm seeing folks' names pop up. So thanks so much for taking time to join us today. We will go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, I'm Beth Dolan, Dean of the College of Health at Lehigh University. Really thrilled that you've joined us today for the first in our series of talks in our Population Health Colloquium this year. Every year we have a theme for the colloquium series, and our theme this year is vital conditions for health and well-being. And so we're going to hear today from Dr. Janke. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dr. Tracy Nichols, who will introduce Dr. Janke. So Dr. Nichols is a full professor in the Department of Community and Population Health in the College of Health. She's also the director of our doctoral program.
Thank you, Beth. Hi, everyone. I am also in addition to those, I'm also co-chairing our Vital Conditions Working Group. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce today's first speaker for our series, which is Dr. Emily Janke. Dr. Janke is the director of the Institute for Community and Economic Engagement and an associate professor in the Peace and Conflict Studies Department at UNC Greensboro. As the director of ICEE, Emily leads and supports initiatives that encourage, support, elevate, and amplify faculty, staff, student, and community colleague, community-engaged teaching, learning, research, creativity, activity, and service in ways that promotes the strategic goals of the university. She does everything, basically. She addresses pressing issues in the Piedmont Triad and serves the public good of communities across the state, nation, and world. An important aspect of her role is connecting and convening community-engaged scholars within and beyond the university to focus on community-identified priorities through partnerships. Emily's scholar and administrative work addresses multiple aspects of community engagement, focused on community university partnerships and institutional culture and change strategies. She focuses on tracking and measuring community engagement and public service within and across institutions of higher education and the recognition of community engaged scholarship in reappointment, promotion, and tenure policies. She looks at the role of conflict management and transformation in community university partnerships, institutional support for community engagement, innovations in scholarly communications, and reciprocity, collaborative communication, and restorative practices as aspects of high-quality, ethical community engagement. She is also, along with Barbara Holland and Krista Medlin, the author of Collaboratory, a publicly searchable online database that shares and institutional stories about who, what, where, with whom, and what ends community university partnerships are working towards. So that's her official bio. I do also have to say it has been a great pleasure of mine for many years to call Emily a colleague. When I was at UNC Greensboro, I have worked closely with her on many of the topics that she is going to talk about here today, and I find her to be an amazing resource and treasure at UNCG. Miss her terribly, but so glad she is with us today. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Emily.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Is that showing up for you? Place current share, maybe. There we go. Is that working now? Excellent. Thanks so much, Tracy. And thanks to Beth and Sherry and Jason for the warm welcome and invitation to be here with you today at Lehigh, virtually from Greensboro, North Carolina. I wanted to take a moment also just to connect to the relationships and acknowledge the web of relationships that we're in that allow us to be here together today in this space and place. That includes people who have done all of the work to nourish our bodies and our spirits, the folks who have grown the food and cooked the food and transported the food so that we can be sitting here nourished and able to be present in our bodies and together on this webinar. Also, I wanted to acknowledge the web of relationships that allow us to be here, that include the caregivers and caretakers of those who we love so that we can leave them for a moment and be here in this space in front of our computers, paying attention to each other and to these ideas. And so I don't take it for granted that each of us is on this call today, because I understand and I know and I appreciate what it means for us to be in this web of relationships and all the things that had to go right and all of the bad days that we had to get through, that our ancestors had to get through, for us to be able to sit here in this moment together and really think about what it means to be an educator, a scholar in a modern university, in a way that's connected not only with others and in community, but also in a way that's wholesome and connected to ourselves. So this is a exciting topic for me. It's one that I have been working on really my whole career. I started at Penn State, so I missed the fall where you are. And so early on in my degree in higher education, I studied public scholarship because I got into higher ed because I really wanted to be able to make that connection between the university and all of the talents and resources and community and all the talents and resources and community, knowing that there was an important opportunity that we were often missing. And so it was interesting to me when a couple of summers ago, I was contacted by Karen Fisher, who writes for the Chronicle of Higher Education, wanting to do an interview about academic research and public impact. And her question really that motivated her article, her journalism for this was the insight or the observation really that there has been a decline in public trust of higher education. And so she was pretty curious about that because she said, there's so much evidence of the way that institutions of higher education have impacted our communities for good and society for good. And so it seems like there's still these barriers even inside the academy for public impact research, is what she was talking about at first. And so one of the very first things that she said was, it sounds stupid, but can you just define what we're talking about? Like, what is community engaged research? And so that is something that I'm going to share with you today. And so the very first paper I ever published was explicating the idea of public scholarship as a grad student. And it's still something that we're talking about today. So not only is Beth asking this, but also the National Academies of Science had a workshop this June, in which we talked about the key issues that are happening and how do we build institutional capacity for engaged research. And so I do expect that there is there will be a proceedings paper that'll come out, which is going to be amazing. And then I do expect that there will be a consensus paper eventually. And so they're really looking at what are those faculty incentives for community engaged research or engaged research and societal impact. And as you can see, there's lots of sponsors. You've talked about as a college and university, the vital conditions for health and well-being. And it is clear that belonging and civic muscle is a clear element that links the individual and the collective. That if we have a sense of our own wellness, a sense of belonging, social connectedness, that we matter, that we have agency, then we are more likely to engage with others and flex that civic muscle to connect with others, to help others, to ask others how we can be of service to each other. And so it's really clear that federally, as well as in foundations across higher education, that we're all really interested in this question because we know it matters, and that we also know that there are some legacies that are getting in our way of being able to do this work well. And some of it is just how do we define it when we have so many, we have such a spectrum of ways that we're engaged in and with communities. And so I want to share a little bit about the research and the work that I've been doing for the last 20 plus years. And so it's helpful to know that these are just a few, on all these slides, I have the links to the original source. So when you get these at the end, you'll be able to go and sort of track through these. But at UNCG, when I joined in 2008, we were looking at promotion and tenure and policy and faculty guidelines at the university level. We have university unit and then also department level guidelines. And so as part of that work, we looked at what are we talking about? How do we define this? And so this volume on the left, volume 1 came out in 2012, and it includes our definitions of what community engagement is. And when we as a campus were trying to understand how do we define this, we did look at the Carnegie Foundation, which created the first review for the elective classification for community engagement in 2006. And so they were really talking about very clearly reciprocal and mutually beneficial partnerships. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. More recently, Chapel Hill and University of Minnesota scholars there put together a report on setting standards and building conceptual clarity as part of as a report from the Academy of Community Engagement Scholarship. And then individual campuses, and this is just one of them, like the University of Michigan has been putting together public engagement frameworks using different languages. But since the very beginning, since I started grad school in 2004, there have been conversations about what are we talking about. And so the term broader impact came out from NSF not long after I started. And so there were convenings and conversations. How is this different than outreach? How is this different from community-based participatory research or service learning as a pedagogy? And so this is a very evolved conversation. We're really at a fantastic point in time for your campus to be having this conversation. And so one of the things that I've done as a researcher is I examined with some of my colleagues across other universities. I looked at the documents in at UNCG that were the promotion and tenure policy documents at the university, the 7 units, and then there are something like 59 departments. And so there are a lot of policies that we come through, and what we said is, okay, we said the intention in 2010 was for us to insert or include community engaged scholarship as valuable and legitimate form of scholarship. And when we were talking about scholarship, it wasn't just about research and creative activity, but also about teaching and service, and sort of this idea of an integrated faculty life, and that community engagement is also integrated across faculty roles. And so in one of the papers that we published, we presented that we found 77 different terms across all of the different policies. And so there was sort of this proliferation from one document to the next as departments rightfully, and they were encouraged to do so, was to actually look at what does community engagement mean in the context of your discipline and your department. And so in many ways, this is fantastic because folks, what we found is that the department in many ways went further beyond the university policy. That was perhaps, as the first policy to go through, is perhaps the most conservative one in the sense of trying to have a broad enough term that everybody felt like they could be seen and included, and then leaving it really to these others. And so the lesson here is that we still have a lot of terms, but one of our challenges has been to make sure that as we allow for customization or unique terms being used across these different spaces and places, how do we make sure that we're really talking about the same thing and that we're upholding the standards of public scholarship? Oh, I didn't mean for that to go away. There you go. So the second paper that we developed as part of this research study looking at promotion tenure policies and how community engagement was articulated into it, was looking at, so what is community engagement and how is it unique from other forms? And so what we came away with is there've long been lots of definitions of community engagement. And so what we were really talking about, okay, like what are the core aspects or qualities of engagement that make something engagement, no matter what the policy says? So what am I looking for that would be sort of that checkbox of like, okay, it has like these 3 things that must make it community engaged, and it might be different than others. So one of the things I told Beth Fisher in the article for the Chronicle was, look, there's really 3 ways that we can examine community engaged scholarship, but there are also ways that we can talk about it as connected to in a spectrum of other public facing and other publicly impactful relationships and partnerships that we have. And so all types of public facing, public impact, public purpose work is going to look at how do we have activities and artifacts or outputs that demonstrate what we're doing. So how do we have, what kinds of things? Often these are very countable, they're viewable. These are the kinds of things that, yes, community engaged research does, but also does applied research, right? That there might be a public purpose for a program, an exhibit, an event, a data set, a curriculum, that kind of thing. And when we're talking about public impact work in a modern society, in a modern university, there is a huge range of expressions of scholarship. And so when we are looking at these in our policies and in our practice, and so that our policies are reflective of our actual practices, we find that there's this real mosaic of scholarship. And the ones on the right side, book chapter, edited books, tend to be the more traditional ones. And I often argue that these are really connected to our history in the Middle Ages of having a single or a few publishers with a printing press. And so things that got distributed and shared broadly were things that made the cut, so to speak, by a single or a group of people who had access to very specific equipment that could allow the distribution, the publishing and distribution of these materials. And so there was this way for us to really talk about scholarship as these forms and to make these peer-reviewed. And we got really good at that and those kinds of formats and those outputs and artifacts. But as we know, in the last 20 years, especially 10 years, increasingly, we have looked at lots of open forums and larger, broad bands of platforms that we can use to be able to share different types or artifacts of scholarship and of knowledge making and knowledge sharing. And so when we look at community engagement, I always feel like it's not fair because community engagement has not only this ethical partnership piece, but we also are dealing with just the modernization of scholarship, and that in our universities, in our world, we're really trying to figure out how to recognize this mosaic of scholarship in a way that still feels like it is something that we understand in our academy, and that we can review and share. So the SCHOL Comm Lab is one of those partners who have been looking at open scholarship and rethinking research assessment for the greater good. A lot of this comes out of Simon Fraser University in Canada. And so they have some incredible research where they were also looking at promotion and tenure policies across, I forget if it was like 50 or 60 universities, and doing some really cool open scholarship, data reviews of what the terms were that they were using, and I really recommend them. On the left-hand side is the work that I participated in with APLU, so Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, and the Association of American Universities. This was also funded by NSF and now NIH and then NIST. And so the work is really about how do we accelerate public access to research data. And so while they're talking about a lot of what they're getting at is how do we make sure that the innovations that we had essentially for COVID and COVID vaccines is possible for lots of other things. And so one of the key reasons why I was there was around community engaged scholarship and what does it mean? Who is the public that we're talking about? If it's not just other researchers and private enterprises or in the government, but also looking at communities and what would it mean for them to actually, what does access look like? And so again, we also talked about promotion and tenure and what's getting in our way. So the second element, if we're defining community engagement or any kind of public impact, is that we would, of course, talk about why we're doing this, the purpose and the values that this work is intended for. And so when we look at descriptions of community engagement, we're seeing evidence that this is really intended for a public or a community. It's not a private good, it's not a commercial good, it's really for that wellness. That vitality of the community, that belonging and civic mindedness. And so this is part of community engagement definition, but this is also the kinds of things that we do when we do things that are for communities. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So way back in 2006, there was a impressive report that was created by Research One universities that were looking at civic engagement and really pressing this idea of how do we think about what impact looks like and how is it different than what we used to think about it, right? With that printing press and sort of there being just one audience, the academy. And so what they put forward was this two-dimensional model, and they said, yes, we need academic impact. Absolutely. We want to change how we do scholarship because of the work that we are doing in communities. We want our practice, our knowledge, our interventions to be more impactful, more authentic, more accurate, more equitable. And so, of course, we have that dimension. But if we're looking at community engagement or public impact research, we, by definition, are interested in how do we impact the public or the community. And so they're really looking at then how are we talking about these two dimensions? And so, of course, we go back to the outputs, and the outputs have to, if we're talking about community impact, become more inclusive of that mosaic, because our community might be interested not in a paper, but in a policy change or a practice or a pedagogy or a curriculum or an activity or an event or a whatever it might be. So we've got outputs, outcomes, but the thing that really makes community engagement distinct now, this is the differentiator from that public impact research, is process. And so community engagement is described by the relationship and the ways in which partners work together, i.e. they're working together and collaborative relationships in a context of reciprocity and mutual benefit. And they're also including each other as thought partners. So we each know something, and together we know more. And so it is I was going to say recentering, decentering that knowledge is only in the academy or in our professional practices, and it really can be everywhere. So I talked about the community engagement classification definition, and this has remained unaltered since 2006. And so it defines community engagement as the collaboration among institutions of higher education and their larger communities for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. And what I really like to highlight is that they use both mutually beneficial and reciprocal or reciprocity in the same sentence because they're two different things. And yet we pretty much always describe these. We often conflate them and use them like synonyms. And so I want to really highlight what it means to be mutually beneficial. What it means to be reciprocal. So if mutually beneficial is the win-win, right? Like we both get to win, right? There's something on here. It might even be low impact, right? Like there might be something that we're doing for our academic community that is very impactful for us. It's really changing how we think about things. But that product, that single artifact itself, may have a pretty low impact on community, right? But it's still actually on here. We're still really thinking about that. It's mutual benefit. Mutual benefit is kind of easy in the sense that all relationships are looking to get something out of it at the end of the day, whether it's an intimate relationship or a business relationship. We typically, even if it's just a good feeling, we are in it to have some sort of mutual benefit. Reciprocity is unique in the sense that it is really, I like to say, just thought partnership or co-researcher or collaborator relationship with our community partners who are outside of the academy. And so when we think about, when I was doing my dissertation research, looking at partnership and a sense of partnership identity, when I interviewed folks and I said, would you describe this person as your partner or this is a partnership? And at the very gut level, they would say, oh, no. They're just like, we're just really helping each other out. We're really just collaborating. I do things for her. She comes here and I'll show her students around. And so we really do things for each other. And then other folks, when I'd ask them, they'd say, oh, yeah. And they would use words like, yeah, we really work well together. We really come up together or with each other on the topic. And so they would really talk about these ideas like withness rather than the to or for, on, or on behalf. So any single artifact when we're trying to understand, so is this activity, is this class, is this program community engaged, we can look at it and see what are the aspects that we're really doing. Were we planning the beginning? Is the inception of the idea together? Are we doing this together with each other? Are we implementing it? Are we kind of reviewing it together? So we can look at that, the individual activity or the artifact, but in the context of a whole relationship, of a whole partnership, there's going to be moments when you're doing things for each other. You might help them write a letter to get a grant that's going to go to the agency, that's going to help them get something that might not directly help you, but you're doing it for them because in the context of your partnership, you have a reciprocal partnership in which your thought partners, your collaborators, you care about each other. And that allows you to have moments that you really then have deepened that relationship and you kind of go thicker into that cone of working together. And so this is the citation here is an early lesson that I learned when I tried to create a day-long conference that was with some other national partners. And early on, I learned the danger really of planning something and then saying, hey, we'd love for you to partner with us after it's already all planned. And they said, the participation is not really a proxy for reciprocity. You have to involve us in the beginning. It's not just inviting us at the end. So if process is both about relationships and about epistemological inclusion or epistemic justice, it means that's the thought partner piece, that we are intentionally looking for people whose knowledge and wisdom has often been overlooked. And so this is another area where we're modernizing the academy through community engagement to recognize formally and with legitimacy how we can work with collaborators who don't have PhDs, masters, BAs, formal education, and that we can be collecting information and have relationships that are outside of the usual ones that we tend to have and value in higher education. And so there is quite a bit of scholarship that is looking at this idea of epistemic justice or epistemic inclusion or exclusion. And so when we are doing community engaged work, so many of us are also working towards acknowledging diverse forms of knowledge production beyond the traditional academic measures. We're also, because this is about process and it's about relationship, it is about moving at the speed of trust and relationship. Byron White is a colleague who's now at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he has written about this and spoken about this for quite a long time. He actually was a journalist for many years. And so he really helps us understand that so much of our work that we're doing is repair work in communities, because we have a history, even if we don't individually have a history, there is a legacy of a type of relationship that may or may not have had harm. And I'll actually rephrase that, because I'm a peace and conflict studies professor. I know that in any relationship, there's conflict, and conflict is natural, normal, and inherent, and we should plan for it and expect it. And we should also understand that it can be generative and productive, or it can be destructive. And so if we understand that when we are doing community engaged work as an individual for my class or my research, or as an institution, we're trying to develop some really institutional established partnerships, that we're often not walking in as a neutral collaborator, as a blank slate, that we're really creating an opportunity for us to build a sense of trust and relationship. And so one of the things that Byron talks about is that despite good intentions, there are powerful forces within institutions that challenge our best efforts at democratic engagement. And he says, institutions don't care, people care. And so this is the real opportunity for us to be able to look at, what do we know as humans talking to other humans that need to be a part of how we treat each other institutionally? And how do we really continue to think about, in the vitality framework, it's belonging, which is the health and wellness of the individual, and the connectedness of that to the civic muscle, right? That you can't have one without the other. You can't have the institution without the people. And the people are together in this institution because they have a common goal. So when we're looking at process, it's really the key. So if we're talking about community engagement and we have policies or descriptions or stories that we're telling in alumni, magazines that are talking about the outputs and the outcomes, but not the processes, then we're really missing that opportunity for us to talk about who's included in that work, how that work is done, and why that process matters. The relationships are also why this takes so long. And when we are trying to understand relationships, community engaged scholarship and how to evaluate it or document it, we often are given space to talk about the outcomes and the outputs, but we aren't given space to talk about the process as its own outcome or output, or its own piece. Tamika Hayden is an Australian scholar and she has been working a lot with Australia and Canada and New Zealand, because they, in their universities, must talk about research impact in terms of funding for each of their institutions from their governments. And what Tamika talks about is that there's really two different parts to impact, that there's both the translation or the pathway, the how, but that's an independent variable, but the dependent variable is the what or the impact. And so we can't talk about like the what, like what happened, without talking about that process. And when we look at the qualities of that pathway, we're really looking at all the steps between the creation of new knowledge and its applications, the many multi-directional communications, the iteration of this, that there's many different activities, right? There's many different kinds of products. So when you think about the two dimensions of impact of academic and community, that you're constantly really looking at, okay, so what type of impact do we need to make now? What kind of impact do we need to make next? And so that is a shared decision that is made, that isn't just for the researcher or the institution to make. If it's genuine, it's really talking with that other, the community group about what matters to them. And so that way, in that way, it's a negotiation that is being made. At UNCG, we have, so, we've learned a lot through looking at our promotion and tenure policies and doing this work over time. And we also have needed to reimagine what this work looks like for us and how we talk about it. Because believe it or not, we still have folks on campus who say, I think I'm a community engaged scholar, but can I talk to you about what I do? And then you can help me identify if what I'm talking about is what you mean. That's happening less and less, I think, because nationally we have folks who are growing up in this work and in this field of community engagement and the community engaged aspects of our various fields and disciplines. But I think it's been really helpful for us to get clear about the spectrum as a way, and this is not only for teaching, but I'm going to talk about it in terms of teaching because I think it's a helpful example. So when we have courses and we want to know, and this happened for the Carnegie classification application, we needed to be able to tell Carnegie, how many community engaged courses do we have? And how do we know they're community engaged? And so we have been tracking courses that are community engaged at UNC in different sort of strategies for the last 12 years. One of the things that has become apparent is that we really want folks to understand that there is a developmental pathway for us, for our institutions, for our community partners towards deep engagement. And that when we're working with students developing classes, we might need to start at the very beginning of a community-focused course in which the topic of the course is focused on, or aspects of an activity or assignment are focused on a particular community. And so in our case, we might look at Greensboro and look at the civil rights history and understand redlining if I'm taking a course in housing, right? And so I'm going to use our specific community or a specific community to really address the student learning outcome. And so in that way, there's the first level of student focused. And so that's really important for students who are just getting to know the topic or the community, right? Our community partners, when we do go into deeper engagement with them, they like for us to know their history. They like for students to be oriented to what the issues are and why there is even a need for that nonprofit or that agency or that funding. The second level is community placed. And so that is really, so in the first one, focus is just the community is sort of the topic or the text. Then community placed is the occasional, perhaps bringing a community partner to your class to speak or to take students on a field trip out to the farm to learn more about sustainable practices or the clinic. And so it's a bit more transactional. It's more, hey, can you come and help us? We would like to be able to teach this. And so it's really about, there's a little bit there, and you're deepening your relationship, and students are really getting a really valuable experience because they're really in real life, real time, getting to see a bit more about the thing that they're learning about. And then the third area, right, is that mutually beneficial, reciprocal, community engaged curriculum or experience in which students are spending time. Well, let's start actually with the community partner is spending time with the instructor, developing the service learning or the curricular engagement outcomes, the activities. They're thinking about what would be helpful for the students and align with their student learning outcomes, but would also really help that agency or that organization. And so in that way, these are the really precious partnerships that are hard to earn, and they're important to maintain, but we often, and we want these, but we don't want to miss out on these other layers of either student development or relationship development. And so what we've been able to do is talk about if there are these three different ways of being engaged with the community or in the connected to the community, then where do you want to be this semester? Where do you want to be in 2 years from now? And also maybe you're at a point where you need to step back for a little bit of time because of something that's going on, even in that community, that we need to sort of step back from this deeper relationship into one that might be more community placed. So there's this sense of choice and spectrum, but also legitimacy that, like, yes, this is good work. Thank you, faculty, for doing this. And there's no shame in not being at that community engaged end of the spectrum right away, because we need everybody. We need everybody in this work. There is enough work for us all. So speaking of enough work for us all, when we are thinking about community engagement and where this work is, it is everywhere. And so Tracy Nichols can certainly testify to the challenge of sort of the whack-a-mole of, if you think you're just going to look at and address inclusion of community engagement and diverse ways of knowing and being in this world, you can't just look at promotion and tenure policy. You really have to look at recruiting and hiring and work plans and annual reports or reviews, reappointments. So there's this whole kind of cascade of areas that are incredible opportunities to modernize our academy, our universities. And fortunately, again, we're several decades into this work where folks are and have implemented these into all of these things that we're talking about here. We also have decades of research that we know that community engagement is integral to student success. It's things that can differentiate our campuses from others, that help students know that if you come here, you're going to have relevant and meaningful experiences. And they are going to be experiences not only help to recruit and retain them, but afterwards for them to have a sense of the careers that they want to be going into, because they had some career exploration and career development as they were in their community engaged work. And so this is an example of the primer that the North Carolina Campus Engagement Group has created, that has basically collected a lot of the research about this to help people sort of understand where the state of affairs are. We know that community engagement matters, especially as women and faculty of color are overrepresented in the community engagement field, so they're more likely to pursue community engagement. And yet they're also more likely to experience stress and dissatisfaction, be advised away from community engagement, towards more traditional forums, especially before review for promotion and tenure, if those are applicable to their work or their profiles. And so we know that this is space that we can talk about equal, trying to find the same metrics, and we're working now on our work plans at UNCG. And so it's really struggling with, how do we create a plan for a whole unit that has all these different disciplines and fields that make it equitable, that means that everybody is viewed and represented fairly and accurately. But we know that the same measures aren't going to get us there. And so how do we talk about this in a way that's inclusive of diverse ways of knowing, that is modernizing the community? And we know that folks are still confused about service, and community engagement. And if it looks like it's in the community, then maybe that's a service thing. Fortunately, we know that there are indicators of scholarly work. And so this is kind of standard and revered review of scholarly work, and sort of what are the criteria. If we look across, I think they looked across 100 different, or actually it was Diamond, it was another study, but they looked across 100 fields, and they basically said, okay, what is scholarship? If we're calling this all, within the academy, what are we talking about if we're all scholars here? And so they said, okay, we all, whether you are a musician, a bench scientist, a community engaged scholar, at this point, we all have these 6 areas, or indicators. So we have clear goals. We know what we're going to do. We're setting out to. We go around and see if other people have done it or what we're kind of building on or referencing. We look at what our plan is going to be and if that's an appropriate way to approach it. We want to know if we have significant and really meaningful results. So we look at what we did in a reflective manner and a systematic way. And then we have to communicate it out. So we have to share it in some way. It doesn't just exist on our mind or on a plan, but it's disseminated and communicated, and it's really and it's open, right, in that way for others to comment on and review and build on, so that they can continue the scholarly cycle. And then the 6th part is that it's ethical, right? That anything that we're doing is something that that our institutions would want to stand by, and that we as humans want to stand by. We know that community engaged scholarship is having a moment, and so this is really great for your campus, right? Where folks are investing in money, and so TEFN is the Transforming Evidence Funders Network, and so they are a group of funders that are looking at how do we invest our dollars so that we are actually doing encouraging research that benefits society. And so this is an incredible report that just came out just a year ago. And so they're really looking at what are those levers that they can be investing in. And so it'd be worth it to take a look at this. I've used the word modernizing scholarship for public good in this talk, and that is also part of the action framework that a bunch of great colleagues have been working on. And so there's this fantastic report that's, again, looking at what do leaders need to do to incentivize this on our campuses, to reward it. I want to draw your attention to not only that there's a longer report, but also that there's an Airtable database of lots of different strategies and tactics that were curated in an incredible way for this report. And so my purpose in sharing these with you is not to go through these slides one by one, but to be able to share sort of like, here's a primer and here's where you can go back to as you're having these conversations. So in a summarizing way, community engagement is characterized in 3 ways. And I hope that this is a way for you to remember 3 things. Like, I can only remember 3 things. So I always have to say, okay, what are 3 things I can remember? Okay, outputs, outcomes, and process, or OOP is another way of thinking about it. When I mentor colleagues to tell their narrative for promotion and tenure dossiers, I work with them on how to kind of work through what is your agenda, what are the threads, what are the methods and approaches, and hey, these are the standards, right, of scholarship, but they're also incorporating this idea of process and how do you plan for not only your research, but how do you work towards that. And so there's some handouts that can be helpful that I've created that are linked here. The University of Minnesota They have put together a community engaged scholars scholarship review committee at the university system so that a community engaged scholar could submit their dossier to this committee and have them review it independent of their colleagues in their department or the unit. And so these are folks who know community engaged scholarship. And so I've just shared just one of the pages here. And so look, they're doing they're using, right, those indicators of scholarship goals, preparation, methods, and so on. So they go through there. And so it really talks about what is the evidence that one would need to have in order to evaluate whether this meets expectations or does not. So we're at a very well-developed space. We know that when we are looking at faculty work, we need to talk about the language, we need to have a definition, and that we also need to talk about this across faculty roles, that this isn't just about teaching or just research or just service, that when we're doing this work, we are moving in and out of these ways and these work roles. We know we need to talk about who's a peer in peer review and expand that definition to the folks who, hey, and if one of the areas of impact is our community, they are a peer. And so how are we starting to look at how, what is an appropriate evaluator for our work? When we're talking about products, right? One of the things that Pablo Alperin and others in ScholComm Lab that I was talking to you about with Simon Fraser University found is that in a lot of policies, when they're identifying products, they're saying examples of research that could be included for promotion and tenure include books, articles, presentations, peer-reviewed, right? And so they said, may include but not limited to, but then they only indicated very traditional products. And so what ends up happening is people think, oh, well, if they didn't name it, it doesn't really count. And so we're starting to push towards, let's talk about and give words to the mosaic of scholarship that we're talking about. And so as we are doing this work, we are really also pushing for this idea of inter and transdisciplinary knowledge, using the idea of transdisciplinary knowledge of outside of the disciplines in the community and ways that we're engaging scholars. I do have some additional resources that I'll share with you on these slides. And so I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share the work that we've been doing, the research that I've done over the years, and I welcome any questions or conversation.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really great, amazing, and comprehensive. As always, when I listen to you, I get so many thoughts and ideas. But before we get into some questions, I do want, people have been asking, you will, in addition to the recording, we are going to have the slides to be able to distribute to people since there are so many amazing resources that we can access from there. That's great. Great, thank you. So I really love the reimagine and the example that you gave, tying it to curriculum and to teaching of community focused, community placed, and then community engaged. And so it got me thinking about particular issues. Being a new college, we have, when we're thinking about it, applying that to research, we have a lot of faculty coming, some who may have already been doing community engaged research, but now are in a new community where they may not know the issues in that community, right? Or other people who are just starting down, and doctoral students who are starting down this path. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to ways that maybe from your administrative role, you have at an institutional level help support that transition from community focused into community engaged and building community partners and partnerships.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, really at a institutional level, so much of what folks do and experience are in their departments and in their fields. And so I think one of the things that has been most important has been the connecting of mentors. And so there have been some departments that when they have identified mentors for new faculty, that they have not only a sort of a traditional kind of mentor who's been there for a long time is going to help them know where the ropes are, perhaps the research too, but also if they're a community engaged scholar, that there's somebody who's a community engaged mentor. And so that is often someone who's helping them to understand what is, some of that can be the introduction to this community and what do you need to know. In other cases, I think it is really what do you need to know about how to be an effective scholar and sort of what are the things, how do you produce papers or presentations along the way about that process and where are places that matter and how do we, and one of the things really is also when I talk with faculty, especially new faculty, to talk about all of their community engagement work as scholarship. Because so many, or not so many, some of the scholars who are new to the academy and are coming because they came to the academy like to remake the academy because they wanted to, their first generation student, or they're coming from, or sorry, first generation, well, yeah, student, faculty member. And so they're coming to be able to make a difference in their communities. And so they'll talk about service or like their public good or that commitment. And I always want to let them know, I said, that's great. You can talk about your commitment to these communities, but also make sure that your colleagues understand that this is also an area of like one of your research agendas and the way that you're working in this. And then let us help you sort of take that forward. So other things that I would like to be able to do that I haven't done as much since COVID, and I think we could do more of, is to be able to do, I know University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill has done groups of scholars who come together and they do bus tours as community engaged scholars. And so it's sort of like a fellows program. And so they actually learn about and with different organizations to find out what's happening. I know on our camp, I, again, before COVID, talked about what would it be like to go, 2 miles in either direction down Market Street here in Greensboro and talk about the history and how we have a historically Black college and university, North Carolina A&T, 2 miles down the road from UNC Greensboro, and what the like the disparities and the opportunities look like and how they're different. So I think that orientation is such a key part. Working with libraries, one of the things that we've done is to create resources on our website about where can you find community identified priorities. And so that might be that your community foundation has developed a report, or your school system or the allies for your school systems may have generated, these are the priorities of this region. And so aligning and learning about those rather than doing your own needs assessment, really check to see what are the things that they have put together task forces on. And I think that would be an amazing way to get started. So I hope that helps.
That helps.
You probably have really great ideas. I feel like I'm talking.
Can you describe the P2 program a little bit? Because I think that's also really helpful in building community partnerships.
I'd love to. Yeah, so a few years, about 6 years ago, we started a internal funding mechanism or award that is a cohort program that is for teams of faculty, staff, and community partners, and then students are also included if they want to be. Where they receive funding for 3 years, but they're also part of a cohort professional development program. And the idea is that there's enough there for folks to put together a proposal to say, we would like 3 years to identify our partnership. We have these initial people, there might be more people we bring online, and then our pathways. And that is literally the strategies and sort of the things that make it sticky. So how do we create pathways through this organization so the organization can offer this curriculum? Or how can we embed this into our college so that students now have the opportunity to work with this community partner over years? And so the pathway development is, again, sort of how does this structurally get sticky or stuck into our work? It is not a lot of money. It is currently $6,000 in the first year, $6,000 in the second, and $4,000 in the third year. But that money is really allowed for most anything that our policy allows. And so it's really important because what we found were that so many folks were saying, you know, I had to put together a partnership really fast for this grant because the grant requires one, right? And we're going to see that more and more, that people are going to be looking for established partnerships. But the faculty said, we don't have money to establish the partnerships. We really have to write, like the development of the partnership is in request or response to a request for funding. And that's often so fast that we're writing the letters for our community partners, right? And that we're really not engaging them on the front end. And so this, we call it P2, Partnerships and Pathways, award program is meant to provide that kind of funding that might pay a community partner, it might pay for training or travel or food, some student time to be able to bring people together. It's whatever is needed. And so what we find is that that's really important. And then the professional development sessions are meant to connect people to each other and their teams, as well as across teams, so that over time, forget what number, we're something at like 70 people at UNCG have gone through this training. And so they really can identify as a community engaged scholar, like, hey, I got the funding and I also participate in all this stuff. So like, I'm not confused about what this is anymore, if I ever was. And so the strategy sessions are intended to help people where they are or meet them where they are. So some of the ones that we've done is around intellectual property and copyright, and sort of the questions of, hey, if we're doing this together, but I'm attached to this university, but my partner wants to be able to use this work for, you know, revenue generation. How do I do that, right? And so there is somebody at a university who can help us think through that, because that's really important to think about at the beginning and also in the middle and the end. And then other times it's, hey, the most recent one has been just looking for research dollars. And so having someone come in from our Office of Sponsored Programs to help do a kind of a module around finding research funding. So that's been, I think that has been one of our jewels. And we've talked about it a lot because it has had such long lasting effects for those individuals who are connected. And I think just knowing that there's an office and a person to call and say, I have this issue, and you're not asking a favor. It's like, it's literally my job to answer and to put together a solution is, I think, invaluable.
Thanks. That's really great. And I think it really illustrates what you were saying earlier, like inviting people once the conference has already been planned. That's what a lot of these grant submissions end up creating, those partnerships where people are invited in really late. So I think giving people that space, even if it's a small amount of money, that space and that time is so critical. I have more questions myself, but I want to take one from the Q&A, which is, what do you see as the future of community engagement in higher education, particularly in relation to interdisciplinary collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it feels like it is the future. And so, again, because of a need for a reorientation away from the traditional disciplines, that I really value disciplinary knowledge. And I also really think it's important for us to be able to understand how we can work across disciplines and different ways of knowledge. And so community engagement is already, just by virtue of having an academic and a community partner, already bridging ways of knowing and like literally fields or disciplines or organizational schemas. And so the challenges that we are facing are going to take all these different lenses, which we're not trying to sort of like morph into like a soup, but we really need these distinctive ways of knowing, because I think they're so complementary to each other. And then when we bring them together, it can be really transformative. So we're also seeing that. So with the P2 grant, one of the things that we really encourage is interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. I don't think we have had any that have just been in one department. because what we really want are, again, not only for different ways of knowing and different people to be invested, but also we want to make this stuff stickier in the sense of if this is happening in a lot of places, if one department falls down or one person has to leave, right? Then now we still have an initiative that is really institutionally supported. So I also think if we're investing as institutions, not just as individuals, then we need to be committed to this, a really robust way of committing to partnerships that allow people to come and go as they need to and as is appropriate, but means that the partnership continues, that we're not suddenly divesting from the community because of somebody leaving for whatever reason, or pausing to be on research leave or sabbatical. So yes, but definitely with funding, we're moving that way.
Thank you. I want to move us a little bit to the ways that we measure all of this work and the ways that we incorporate it into the promotion and tenure guidelines. And so you brought up the whack-a-mole problem.
Yeah.
And you also brought up kind of how community engaged research and service and teaching also overlaps with public engagement, with DEI, with all of these other, with entrepreneur work, right? So given that you have so many interconnecting pieces and you have so many places within academia where where it pops up and needs to be addressed, do you have recommendations on where are good places for conversations to start in a unit or in a university?
Yeah. I feel like it's often like a moment of opportunity. And so I think the way, like, there may be like, what is the best? And then I feel like the best is always like what you have the ability to do right now in some ways. And so at times it has been, we're working on hiring a new candidate, right? And so we have the opportunity to shape that job description. And so you take that opportunity and you write it in there. And even though, your promotion and tenure policy and all this stuff isn't done yet, if that's the opportunity to start to look to people and signal that that matters, then you can start to recruit people who are going to help you shape that policy, right? Because those are the people who know, oh, okay, this is what we really need to have. And I can support the people who've been here a long time who are also looking for this. I really think that promotion and tenure and work plan, and then your work review, but I guess they're the plan, those to me, outside of the hiring process, are so key. Because I think, or not because, because they are indicators of what is valued and how you should spend your time. And so if you feel, and this sort of goes back to the vitality framework, like if you feel your individual wellness, you're connected, you're belonging, a sense of belonging, right, to this group and to others, then you're going to be more willing to contribute, right? And so if we want a healthy faculty in our departments, then we also need to be making sure that the form of scholarship that they're doing is valued. So promotion and tenure is a key one, but then when we worked on that first, it took us a full decade to really get to the work plan, I would say, at UNCG, to really realize, oh, wait a minute. And so Carrie Ann O'Meara, is always ahead of, many steps ahead of where I am. And so I'm grateful because she is such a huge trailblazer and incredible person. And so if you had to really stick it to two, and even with Carnegie, with the application, I'm like, they do require you to talk about promotion and tenure. I'd love to see one about work plan in the future, because I think that is really where you have conversations every year and you get reviewed every year. And so if you have a practice in your department or your unit of having peer reviews of annual review, and you're talking to each other and you are making sense of what it is that Emily's doing that year, then over time your colleagues are on board with you, so that when you get to that once in a lifetime review for promotion and or tenure, or promotion twice in a lifetime, then you already have created a culture of folks who understand what it is that you're doing. So those would be the two that I think are key. And I do think the mentoring piece is just so huge. And something, because if folks have a sense of how to navigate and talk about who they are, I think that's really key. Because so many community engaged scholars do community engaged scholarship, but they also have like bench science or policy work. Like it's not one approach that they follow. They have multiple often. And so that can be really confusing of how do I talk about this? Because I feel like I'm an imposter or a fraud because I also do things without my community. It's like, that's okay. It's okay. But let me help you talk about it.
That's great. I still feel like an imposter all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to take another one from the group. What strategies do you recommend for maintaining long-term relationships with communities beyond initial projects?
Yeah. I think really invest in getting to know them and what their priorities are and what their programs are. And so it's sort of like that community focus where you're just learning. It's like an orientation, like, I want to know about why you do what you do, because that will help you better understand. And not only from meetings with them, but also just learning about the organization, help understand why they, of all the things that they have on their plate, would want to be able to connect with you and to fit you in basically and make you a priority for this project. And so there needs to be this real alignment to their, if it's an organization or a nonprofit or a neighborhood, right? We're all so busy. How are we really fitting into what it is that they need to do? So I think one of the keys is that. Another is to try to develop it in partnership with not just one person, but multiple. So one of the things around building partnership identity, which is my dissertation research, was that it can't just happen with two people in a dyad. Otherwise, it's just you and me, and it's not we, right? But if we create a partnership that has some cultural norms that I can introduce somebody else to, and they kind of notice, oh, wow, you talk back and forth, or you get into touch with each other by text, not email, right? Or when you meet, it's in person over coffee, not, right? And so there are these norms that you can pick up in a small kind of partnership entity that can be passed along to other people. And so even just really simple things like communication norms can get developed when you have we, not just you and me. And then the other part is to really think about and be very honest about that there may be times of inactivity or slowness. So you may have a project, and the project for some folks is going to be done in a summer, right? And it was very measurable, it was a smart goal, right? And so having a conversation of, this is one project, but I'd like to be able to work with you in the long term over many different things. And so are you willing to work with me on this one thing? We'll see how it goes. And then can we sort of understand that I would like to do this? And if you really just have a goal for one project and then move on, because I've also seen that where folks have a thing that they're offering, then you need to be really clear about that with folks so that they're not feeling like it was a one and done and they were really hoping for a longer term relationship and they didn't really need this, but what they wanted was the relationship. So I would say that's another key thing. So really getting to know what are their motivations or their pathways to being able to work with you, bringing other people along. So that kind of interdisciplinary idea, I think, is really key. And then talking about the intention to endure past a project would be a third.
Great, thank you. Since so much of it is, it is process, it is relationship building, it is bringing in and building partnerships. And as you mentioned, this takes more time than traditional scholarly outputs, right, are normally measured. So do you have any ways that you talk, particularly talking to faculty, you mentioned that several faculty will leave an institution before they've even come up for a review or be dissuaded in the early stages of their career for doing this kind of work. So what are ways at the institutional level that we can start building in that time that it takes, the recognition? I mean, I think some of what you were saying about the annual reviews and the annual conversations is one way. But it's always felt to me almost like you're hit with two jobs to build the relationship, then be able to document the building of that relationship and documenting all the impacts, and then often still asked to also document the other kind of traditional outputs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's insightful. So can you restate the question part that you had?
The question was just, do you have any suggestions, either could be at the mentoring level, but particularly at the institutional level, where we can start trying to build in the appreciation of the time that it takes?
Yeah, certainly. I certainly think that it is giving time and attention. So we often, for different types of courses that we're teaching, if they have field placements, right, or mentoring or advising, we know that those kinds of relationships with those students or that kind of curriculum takes a longer time, and it's different than teaching a lecture class or something where there's really just here's the guidelines for certification or whatever it might be. And so part of it is really looking at what opportunities are there to really talk with the faculty member, aligning the classes that they're assigned to the topics or the part that would allow them to start working with a partnership or a partner, and it could be that kind of community focused or community based before it goes further. Really accepting that there and allowing a narrative in our annual reviews for folks to be able to describe how this is part of the partnership itself. One of the slides that I showed was sort of the independent and the dependent variable, right? And that if I want to have impact, I actually have to have both. And so I think having space for people to talk about that as their part of their narrative and that they are really investing in this partnership, I think is a key part of it. And so I think we're still struggling to be able to articulate all the ways because each relationship is so different. And some of them, they're like, good, we got it done in an hour and you move through and you're really efficient. And for others, you're inviting the translator and they don't come, right? So you have to reschedule. Or you're trying to find bus passes and you're trying, right? And it's a different kind of relationship. And so trying to shoehorn that all into a single way that we talk about community engagement. It's like there's no one kind of community or one kind of engagement or one kind of relationship. And so again, being able to have that narrative and really talk with folks about the value and the essential nature of if we're going to do this kind of work, then we need to invest in this process and allow that. And I also really encourage folks to publish about their partnerships or their processes. There are a number of journals that are peer-reviewed academic. So, they were created in the spirit of let's legitimize community engaged scholarship, right? And so they are really robust journals that are peer-reviewed and that look like traditional academic work. In which faculty have had good success presenting at these conferences, but also publishing in these journals. So I'd also tend to invest in funding for faculty to go to conferences that are not only disciplinary ones, so sometimes you have to choose disciplinary or like a community engaged field one, and I would actually say you need both for most scholars, especially as you're getting started, because that's where you'll really find the opportunities to publish, the interdisciplinary opportunities to collaborate and across institutions.
Great, thank you. We're getting close to the end of time, so I just want to catch one or two more of the remaining questions. How do you prioritize and amplify the voices of marginalized communities in your initiatives?
Yeah. One of the things, one of the things that we really seek to do is to pay our communities when we're working with them. And so this has been one of the challenges. We have a community advisory board that's made up of residents. So they're not like the director of a nonprofit. It's actually a resident living in the communities that we are wanting to work with. And so we have a budget for paying for those community partners for participating in training, because many of us are doing that. And so payment, and then also we're looking at, what are other forms of remuneration beyond money that matter. And so some of those are thinking about the kinds of like materials that folks would need to do the research, whether it's books or iPads or things like that. So what do they need to be able to be co-researchers with us? We're trying to do funding like the P2 grant that allows people to just develop relationships with no promises either way. If this is going to work, it's okay. And if not, success can be, one of our P2 grantees, like they stopped after year 2 because they said, we actually realized we don't need this. And so success was that they realized that their group didn't need a formal structure. They were really good with this informal networking, touching base with each other, but they didn't need a partnership entity identity. And that was actually too much and out of sync with the organizational effort that they had, or the capacity that they had. So success is sometimes just learning that you're not, going to go forward in this particular way or in a different way. And so I think, so the payment, and then of course the things like identifying the place, time, platform that is for community partners early on. When we do community health assessments and we would want the community voice, we would invite people to attend a meeting at the university, and wow, nobody would come other than professionals, right, who are working in these agencies. It wasn't the residents of Greensboro or Guilford County. And so really thinking about, we have to go into the community. And so oftentimes if we were looking for community voice, one is we created this community advisory board to help us with that, but we've also known that we have to go table at local events where things are happening and talk to people at the farmers market, for example, to let them know about what's going on, or going to the mobile market. And so that's been a lot of that community voice at the resident level, for sure. And I think it's important to talk about in our P2 grants, when we are looking at the community partners. We used to just say, okay, well, if you have the principal, for example, of the school, then great, you've got a community partner. But if the project itself is really working with parents or looking to influence students and parents, then we say, okay, well, where are the parents? How can you involve them as collaborators and as co-researchers, co-investigators, so that they're not just the focus, but they're actually collaborators? And so we've really learned to I almost think of it as like 2 levels of, there's the folks who are also getting paid in their nonprofits or the agency of a hospital, who can work with us and have time carved out. But we also need to be able to reach deeper into the community. But it's way harder. And way different.
Thank you so much. It's been really lovely having this conversation with you and hearing in your presentation and hearing all of your thoughtful approaches to this work that is ever ongoing. And I'm hoping we can continue our conversation as the College of Health goes down this path a little further. I want to thank everybody for attending, and please be on the lookout for our next. We will be sending out information soon on our next event for the Vital Conditions Colloquium. And just again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
It's been great.